I stood in the kitchen, the phone still warm against my ear. My son's words slicing through me like a winter wind. Mom, you're too old for this vacation stuff. Just stay home. Okay. It's better for everyone. Daniel's voice, sharp and dismissive, echoed in my mind long after he hung up. Too old. 68. I'd heard worse. But from my own son. The boy I'd raised single-handedly after his father walked out. The sting was unbearable. A betrayal that burrowed deep, nesting in my chest alongside decades of unspoken sacrifices. I set the phone down, my hands trembling, and stared out the window at the gray Seattle sky. The world felt smaller, colder, as if the walls of my modest home were closing in. But something else stirred to a spark, faint but unyielding, that refused to let his words define me. I'd always been the dependable one, the mother who patched scraped knees, worked double shifts at the hospital, and paid for Daniel's college without a dime from his father. I'd given him everything, even when it meant giving up pieces of myself. Vacations were rare back then, but we'd had our moments camping trips to the Cascades, laughing under starry skies, promising each other we'd see the world someday. Now, 35. Daniel was a corporate lawyer with a sleek condo downtown, a wife who barely acknowledged me, and 2 kids I saw only on holidays. He'd built his life, and somehow, I'd become a footnote in it. Too old for his plans. Too inconvenient for his world. The spark grew into a flame as I paced the kitchen. Too old. I'd show him. I wasn't just some frail widow to be sidelined. I had secrets, resources, and a past Daniel knew nothing about. Years ago, when he was still a boy, I'd inherited a property from my eccentric aunt. A sprawling mansion on a private island off the Washington coast. I kept it hidden. A sanctuary I visited alone when life became too heavy. It was my escape. My rebellion against a world that tried to shrink me. The mansion was no mere house, it was a statement. A fortress of luxury with marble halls, crystal chandeliers, and gardens that bloomed even in winter. I hadn't been there in years. Not since Daniel started pulling away. But now it called to me like a siren. I made the decision that night. The kind of decision that feels like a vow. I'd go to the mansion. Live the vacation Daniel thought I couldn't handle. And I'd make sure he knew it. I'd send him photos glorious. Defiant photos of me living a life he couldn't imagine. Not out of spite. Not entirely. But to remind him who I was. Who I'd always been. I packed a single suitcase, called a private charter to the island, and left without telling anyone. The world didn't need to know, not yet. As the small plane cut through the misty air, I felt the weight of Daniel's words lift, replaced by a thrill I hadn't known in years. This wasn't just a trip. This was my reclamation. The island appeared like a dream through the fog, its cliffs rising sharp against the Pacific. The mansion loomed at the center, its white stone glowing under the late afternoon sun. I stepped onto the gravel path, my heart pounding with a mix of nostalgia and defiance. The caretaker, an old friend named Clara, greeted me with a warm smile, her eyes crinkling with understanding. She'd kept the place pristine, just as I'd left it. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and sea salt, and every room whispered memories of the woman I used to be. Bold, unafraid, alive. I wandered through the grand hall, my footsteps echoing, and felt a surge of power. This was my domain, my proof that I was far from finished. That evening, I stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean, a glass of wine in hand, and took the first photo. The sunset painted the sky in hues of fire, and I angled the camera to capture the mansion's silhouette behind me. I wore a deep emerald dress, one I'd bought years ago but never dared to wear, its fabric catching the light like a challenge. I sent the photo to Daniel with a simple caption, "Enjoying my vacation. Wish you were here." My heart raced as I hit send, imagining his face surprise. Maybe anger. Maybe something else. I didn't care. This was for me. The days that followed were a blur of indulgence. I swam in the heated pool, read novels in the library, and dined on meals Clara prepared with care. Each moment was a rebellion against Daniel's verdict, a refusal to be invisible. I sent more photos of him laughing in the rose garden, me sipping coffee on the terrace, me standing at the cliff's edge with the wind in my hair. Each one was a piece of evidence, a declaration that I was still here, still vibrant. But beneath the thrill, a shadow lingered. Why had Daniel pushed me away? What had I done to become too old in his eyes? The questions gnawed at me, and late at night, alone in the vast bedroom, I wondered if this was revenge or something deeper, something I didn't yet understand. By the fifth day, the photos had become a ritual. I'd staged them carefully, each one more lavish than the last. But the joy was fading. The mansion, for all its grandeur, felt empty without someone to share it. I missed Daniel, not the man who'd dismissed me, but the boy who'd clung to my hand during thunderstorms. I missed my grandchildren's laughter, the way they'd call me Nana and beg for stories. I'd built this performance for Daniel, but it was starting to feel like a mask. The thrill of defiance was giving way to a hollow ache. And I knew this trip wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about understanding why we drifted so far apart. I sat at the grand piano one evening, my fingers brushing the keys, and thought of the last time Daniel and I had truly talked. It was years ago, before his wife, before his career consumed him. We'd sat on my porch, sharing a bottle of wine, laughing about old times. What had changed? Had I failed him somehow? Or had he simply outgrown me? The questions swirled, and I realized this vacation, this act of defiance, was only the beginning. I needed answers, not just photos. I needed to know if we could ever be a family again. The mansion's silence was deafening that night, the kind of quiet that amplifies every thought, every regret. I sat in the library, surrounded by leather-bound books and the faint scent of lavender from Clara's cleaning. But my mind was miles away, back in Seattle with Daniel. His words too old kept looping, each repetition sharper than the last. I'd sent him a dozen photos by now, each one a calculated jab. But his responses were curt, if they came at all. A single "looks nice" or "glad you're having fun" with no warmth, no curiosity. It was as if my defiance meant nothing, as if I was shouting into a void. The realization stung, but it also fueled a new resolve. If he wouldn't engage, push harder, I'd make him see me. I woke the next morning with a plan, one that felt both reckless and necessary. I'd invite Daniel to the mansion. Not just him, his wife, Laura, and their kids, Emma and Liam. If he thought I was too old for his world, I'd bring his world to mine. I'd show him this place, this life I'd kept hidden, and force him to confront the mother he'd dismissed. The idea thrilled me, but it also terrified me. What if he refused? What if he came and saw only an old woman playing pretend? I pushed the doubts aside and called him, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. Daniel, I said, I'm at a place you need to see. Bring Laura and the kids. Spend the weekend. It's important. He hesitated, his silence heavy, but finally agreed. His tone clipped. Fine, Mom. Text me the details. The next 2 days were a frenzy of preparation. Clara and I transformed the mansion into a stage for my family. We polished silver, hung fairy lights in the garden, and stocked the kitchen with the kids' favorite snacks. I wanted it to be perfect, a vision of warmth and grandeur that would shake Daniel's assumptions. But as I worked, memories crept in, memories of Daniel as a boy, his small hand in mine, his trust absolute. I'd been his hero once, but somewhere along the way, I'd become a burden. The thought tightened my chest, and I wondered if this invitation was a mistake. Was I setting myself up for more rejection? Or was this my chance to bridge the gap? When the day arrived, I stood at the dock, watching the ferry approach through the morning mist. My heart pounded as Daniel stepped off, his face unreadable, Laura trailing behind with Emma and Liam in tow. The kids ran to me, their hugs a fleeting warmth. But Daniel's greeting was cool, a nod and a nice place. Laura's smile was polite but distant, her eyes scanning the mansion with a mix of awe and suspicion. I led them inside, my voice bright as I pointed out the chandeliers, the ocean views, the history of the place. I wanted them to feel its magic, to see me as part of it. But Daniel's silence was a wall. He wandered the halls, his hands in his pockets, and I felt the weight of his judgment. Dinner was my next move, a feast under the stars on the terrace. Clara had outdone herself: roast lamb, fresh seafood, a chocolate cake for the kids. I watched Daniel across the table, searching for a crack in his armor. But he ate in silence, his eyes on his plate. Laura made small talk, asking about the mansion's history, but her questions felt rehearsed, like she was humoring me. Emma and Liam, at least, were a joy, their laughter filling the air as they chased fireflies in the garden. For a moment, I felt like a mother, a grandmother, again. But Daniel's distance loomed, and I knew I couldn't ignore it much longer. That night, after the kids were asleep, I found Daniel on the balcony, staring at the dark ocean. I took a deep breath and approached, my heart racing. Why did you say it, Daniel? I asked, my voice soft but firm. Why am I too old? He turned, his face shadowed, and for a moment, I saw something flicker: guilt, maybe, or pain. I didn't mean it like that, he said, but his tone was defensive. You don't need to be running around, Mom. You should be resting, enjoying your life. His words were a knife, twisting deeper. Resting. As if my life was over. As if I had nothing left to offer. I wanted to scream, to tell him how much he'd hurt me, but I held back. Instead, I said, this place is part of my life, Daniel. I wanted you to see it. To see me. He looked away, his jaw tight, and I realized this wasn't just about his words. There was something deeper, something he wasn't saying. I pressed, my voice trembling. What's going on with you? Why are we like this? He didn't answer, just walked back inside, leaving me alone with the sound of the waves. I felt the spark of revenge flare again, but it was tangled with something new, desperation to understand, to fix what was broken. The next morning, I woke to find a note from Daniel under my door. We need to talk. Meet me in the library at noon. My stomach churned as I read it, a mix of hope and dread. Was this his apology? Or another dismissal? I spent the morning with the kids, their chatter a distraction. But my mind was on the library, on what Daniel might say. When noon came, I walked in, my heart in my throat, and found him waiting, his face pale, his hands fidgeting. Mom, he said, his voice low. There's something I need to tell you. The library was bathed in soft light, the tall windows casting shadows across the oak shelves. Daniel stood by the fireplace, his shoulders hunched, a man carrying a weight I couldn't yet see. I sat across from him, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, bracing for whatever he was about to say. The air felt thick, charged with years of unspoken truths. Mom, he began, his voice cracking. I haven't been honest with you. My heart stuttered, but I stayed silent, letting him continue. He paced, his eyes avoiding mine, and I saw the boy he used to be, nervous, vulnerable, needing me. It's not about you being too old. It's about me. I'm in trouble. The words hit like a wave, cold and overwhelming. Trouble. My son, the successful lawyer, the man who seemed to have it all, was unraveling before me. He told me everything, his voice a mix of shame and relief. His firm was under investigation for fraud, a scheme he hadn't started but hadn't stopped either. He'd taken shortcuts, made deals he shouldn't have, and now the walls were closing in. He'd pushed me away, he said, because he was ashamed, because he didn't want me to see him like he's a failure, a fraud. I thought if I kept you at a distance, you wouldn't find out. He whispered. I didn't want you to be disappointed in me. I sat there, stunned, as the pieces fell into place. His coldness, his dismissal, it wasn't about me. It was about his own guilt, his fear of losing the pedestal I'd placed him on. I wanted to be angry, to tell him he'd hurt me for no reason, but the pain in his eyes stopped me. He was my son, and he was drowning. I reached out, touching his arm, and said, Daniel, you're not a failure. You're human, and I'm still here. He looked at me, tears welling, and for the first time in years, I saw him not as the man who'd hurt me, but as the boy who needed his mother. We talked for hours, the library a cocoon for our confessions. He told me about the pressure at work, the fear of losing everything, the way Laura had started to pull away too. I listened, my heart aching for him, but also for us, for the years we'd lost to silence. I shared my own truth, show his words had cut me, how I'd come to this mansion to prove something, not just to him but to myself. I told him about the sacrifices, the dreams I'd set aside, the strength it took to keep going. He listened, really listened, and I felt a shift, a crack in the wall between us. By the time we left the library, the sun was setting, painting the mansion in hues of gold. I felt lighter, but the weight wasn't gone. Daniel's confession had opened a door, but it wasn't enough. I wanted more than understanding. I wanted justice. Not just for me, but for him. He'd been trapped by his choices, by a system that rewarded greed over integrity. And I couldn't let that stand. The spark of revenge I'd felt before was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't about hurting Daniel anymore. It was about righting a wrong, about giving him a chance to redeem himself. That night, I lay awake, my mind racing. Daniel's firm wasn't just a workplace, it was a machine, chewing up people like him, spitting them out when they were no longer useful. I'd spent my career as a nurse, fighting for patients against a broken system, and I wasn't about to let my son become another casualty. But how could I help him? The mansion, this place of power, gave me an idea. It was more than a retreat, it was a symbol, a resource. I had money, connections, and a will that had carried me through worse. I could use it to fight for him, to expose the corruption at his firm, to give him a way out. The next morning, I called an old friend, a journalist named Sarah who'd made a career out of uncovering corporate scandals. Over coffee on the terrace, I told her everything Daniel had shared, keeping his name out of it for now. Her eyes lit up, the way they always did when she smelled a story. "This could be big," she said, scribbling notes. "If you can get me evidence, I can take it public." I nodded, my resolve hardening. Daniel didn't know it yet, but I was already fighting for him. Not with photos or defiance, but with something stronger: truth. I spent the day with Emma and Liam, their laughter a balm for my restless heart. We explored the island, collecting shells and telling stories. And for a moment, I felt whole again. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, I saw Daniel watching from the balcony, his face heavy with worry. I knew he was thinking about his future, about the mess he'd made. I wanted to tell him I was working on a plan, but I held back. He needed to trust me first, to believe in us again. And I needed to trust myself, to believe I could still be the mother he needed. As the weekend drew to a close, I felt a strange mix of hope and fear. Daniel's confession had changed everything, but it was only the beginning. I wasn't just fighting for my pride anymore. I was fighting for my family, for the bond we'd lost, for the man my son could still become. The mansion, with all its grandeur, was a backdrop for something bigger: a chance to heal, to redeem, to reclaim what mattered most. The ferry carried Daniel, Laura, and the kids away the next morning, their figures shrinking against the horizon. I stood on the dock, waving until they disappeared, a hollow ache settling in my chest. The weekend had been a step forward, but it wasn't enough. Daniel's confession had peeled back layers of pain, revealing a truth I couldn't ignore. My son was lost, not just to me, but to himself. His words in the library haunted me, his shame a mirror to my own fears of being irrelevant. But I wasn't done. The mansion, this island, was my stronghold, and I'd use it to fight for him, to pull him back from the edge, back inside. I sat at the mahogany desk in the study, papers strewn before me. Sarah's call had set things in motion, but I needed more than her ambition. I needed evidence, something concrete to expose Daniel's firm. I'd asked him, before he left, to send me anything he had mails, documents, anything that could prove the fraud. He'd hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes, but I'd pressed, my voice firm. You don't have to do this alone. I'd said, let me help you. He'd nodded, promising to dig through his files, but I could see the doubt. He didn't fully trust me. Not yet. That was okay. I'd earn it. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and planning. Sarah connected me with a private investigator, a gruff man named Tom who specialized in corporate espionage. Over a secure line, I outlined what I knew, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Tom was all business, asking for specifics I didn't have yet. But his confidence was contagious. If your son's got anything solid, we can crack this open, he said. Just keep him talking. I hung up, my mind racing. This wasn't just about Daniel Annamarie, it was about justice. About tearing down a system that preyed on ambition and loyalty. Clara noticed the change in me, her eyes sharp as she brought me coffee each morning. You're up to something, aren't you? She asked one day, her tone teasing but knowing. I smiled, swirling the coffee in my cup. Just taking care of family, I said. She nodded, her silence a kind of approval. Clara had known me for decades, through the worst of my struggles, and she understood what this place meant to me. It wasn't just a mansion, it was a testament to my resilience, a reminder that I'd always found a way. By the end of the week, Daniel sent me a package digital files, encrypted, with a note, "Be careful, Mom." My heart swelled at those words, not just for the warning, but for the trust they implied. I forwarded the files to Tom, my hands shaking as I clicked send. The mansion felt alive around me, its walls humming with purpose. I spent hours poring over the documents myself, my old nursing instincts kicking in, methodical, precise, searching for patterns. There were emails, financial records, names I didn't recognize but Tom would. Each piece was a step closer to freeing Daniel, to giving him a chance to start over. But as the days passed, a new fear crept in. What if this backfired? What if exposing the firm destroyed Daniel's career, his family, his future? I paced the grand hall, the chandeliers glittering above, and felt the weight of my choices. This wasn't just revenge against a system, it was a gamble with my son's life. I called Sarah, my voice tight. What happens if we go public and Daniel gets caught in the crossfire? She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're doing this for him, not to him. Trust that." Her words steadied me, but the doubt lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered to the balcony, the ocean a dark expanse below. I thought of Daniel as a boy, his dreams so big they filled the room. He'd wanted to be a hero, not a lawyer caught in a web of lies. I'd failed to protect him from that world, but I wouldn't fail him now. I took out my phone and sent him a new photo, not of the mansion, but of an old picture I'd found in the library, of us camping in the Cascades, his smile wide and unguarded. "Remember this," I wrote, "We're still that family." He didn't reply, but I knew he'd seen it. I could feel it. The next morning, Tom called with news. The files were gold enough to implicate the firm's top executives. Enough to clear Daniel if he cooperated. "We need him to testify," Tom said. "Can you get him to do that?" My stomach twisted. Testifying meant risk. Exposure. Maybe even danger. I thought of Daniel's kids. Of Laura's strained smile. Of the life they'd built. Could I ask him to risk it all? I thanked Tom and hung up. My mind a storm of fear and determination. I come this far. Couldn't stop now. I called Daniel. My voice calm but urgent. "I need you to come back to the island," I said. "Alone. There's something we need to do." He didn't ask questions. Just agreed. His voice weary but willing. As I hung up, I looked around the mansion. Its opulence a stark contrast to the battle ahead. This place had been my refuge. My revenge. But now it was something Moria place to rebuild. To redeem. I was ready to fight. Not just for justice, but for the family I'd almost lost. Daniel arrived at dusk. His face drawn. The weight of his secrets etched in the lines around his eyes. The mansion felt different with him here alone. Its grandeur muted by the tension between us. I greeted him at the door, my heart a tangle of hope and fear, and led him to the study. The room was warm, the fire crackling, but the air was heavy with what was coming. I spent the day preparing, laying out the files, the evidence, the plan. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a crossroads. A chance to save him or lose him forever. We sat across from each other. The desk a barrier that felt both necessary and wrong. I started with the truth. My voice steady. "Daniel, the files you sent they're enough to bring down the firm. But it's not just about them. It's about you. About getting you out." His eyes widened. A mix of shock and fear. "You went through them?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, sliding a folder toward him. "There's enough here to clear your name. But you have to testify. You have to tell the truth." He stared at the folder, his hands motionless, and I saw the battle raging inside him, fear of exposure. Fear of losing everything. Fear of trusting me. The silence stretched, unbearable, until he finally spoke. "Mom, if I do this, it's over. My career, my life with Laura, the kids, it's all gone." His voice broke, and I felt my own heart crack. I wanted to reach for him, to promise it would be okay. But I knew better. This was his fight as much as mine. "You're right," I said, my voice soft but firm. "It might cost you everything. But what's it costing you now? Living with this lie. Pushing everyone away. You're better than this, Daniel. You always have been." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and I saw something shift, something fragile but real. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "After what I said. After how I treated you, why?" I took a deep breath, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Because you're my son. Because I love you, even when you hurt me. Because I believe in you, even when you don't." Tears welled in his eyes, and for a moment, we were just a mother and son, stripped of pride and pain, connected by something stronger than either of us. We talked through the night, piecing together a plan. He'd meet with Tom, provide a full statement, and cooperate with the investigation. It was risky. Whistleblowers weren't always protected, and the firm had deep pockets, but it was his only way out. I promised to stand by him, to use the mansion's resources, my savings, anything I had to keep him safe. As dawn broke, painting the study in soft pinks, he reached for my hand. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "For everything." I squeezed his hand, tears stinging my eyes. "We're not done yet," I said. "But we're together." The next week was a whirlwind. Daniel returned to Seattle, meeting with Tom and Sarah, while I stayed at the mansion, coordinating from afar. I felt like a general in a war room, the grand hall my command center. Clara kept me grounded, her quiet strength a reminder of what I was fighting for. Every call from Daniel brought new tension, details of the firm's retaliation, threats veiled as legal warnings. But he was holding up, his voice stronger each time we spoke. I sent him photos, not of the mansion this time, but of you-sold pictures from his childhood. Reminders of who we were, who we could be again. One night, Sarah called with a breakthrough. The story was ready to go public. A front-page exposé that would name names and shake the firm to its core. Daniel's testimony was the key, and he'd delivered, his statement airtight. I felt a surge of pride, but also terror. The article would drop in 2 days, and there was no turning back. I paced the mansion's halls, the weight of it all pressing down. What if I'd pushed him too far? What if this destroyed him? The doubts were relentless, but I clung to the memory of his hand in mine, his apology, our fragile new bond. The day before the article's release, Daniel called, his voice calm but heavy. "It's done, Mom. They're going to print it." I could hear the fear, but also the relief, like a man stepping out of a cage. "I'm proud of you," I said, my voice catching. "No matter what happens, I'm proud." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I love you, Mom." The words were a gift, one I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. I hung up, tears streaming, and looked out at the ocean. The mansion felt different now, not a fortress of revenge, but a beacon of hope. As I waited for the article to break, I walked the island, the wind carrying the scent of salt and pine. I thought of the woman I'd been when I first came here, angry and hurt, and the woman I was becoming, someone who fought not just for herself, but for her family. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I felt whole. The article hit like a thunderclap, its words reverberating across Seattle and beyond. Sarah's exposé was merciless, detailing the firm's fraud with surgical precision. Daniel's testimony the linchpin that tied it all together. I sat in the mansion's library, the newspaper spread before me, my heart pounding with pride and dread. The headlines screamed of corruption, of executives who'd built empires on lies. And my son's name was there, not as a villain, but as a whistleblower, a man who'd chosen truth over safety. I wanted to call him, to tell him how proud I was, but I waited. He needed space, and I needed to trust him to find his way. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed with messages from old friends, colleagues, even distant relatives, all shocked by the news, by the mansion, by the woman I'd become. I ignored most of them, focusing only on Daniel's updates. The firm was in chaos. Executives resigning, lawsuits looming. He was safe. For now. But the threats hadn't stopped. Tom had arranged protection. A discreet team watching Daniel's condo. But I couldn't shake the fear. The mansion, once my sanctuary, now felt like a war room, its opulence a stark contrast to the battle raging in my heart. Clara found me that afternoon, staring at the ocean from the balcony. "You did good, you know," she said, her voice soft but firm. I shook my head, the weight of it all pressing down. Did I? What if I've ruined his life? She placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding. "You gave him a chance to be honest. That's not ruin, that's redemption." Her words stayed with me, a lifeline as I navigated the uncertainty. I sent Daniel a text. Simple but heartfelt. "I'm here. Always." His reply was quick. "I know, Mom. Thank you." Days turned into weeks, and the mansion became my anchor. I stayed. Not out of defiance now, but because it was where I felt closest to Daniel, to the fight we'd started together. He called often, his voice lighter each time, as if the truth had unburdened him. He told me about Laura, how she'd stood by him despite the chaos, how the kids were asking for Nana's mansion. I laughed, tears stinging, and promised they'd come back soon. But beneath the hope, a shadow lingered. The firm's reach was long, and I knew this wasn't over. One evening, Tom called with a warning. "They're digging into you," he said. "The firm's lawyers. They're looking for leverage. Anything to discredit Daniel." My stomach dropped. I kept the mansion a secret for years, but now it was public. A symbol of my wealth, my independence. Would they use it against me? Against Daniel? I thanked Tom and hung up, my mind racing. I fought for my son, but now I had to protect myself, too. I called Sarah, asking her to dig deeper, to find out what the firm knew. She promised to get back to me, her voice steady, but I could hear the urgency. That night, I wandered the mansion, its halls echoing with memories. I thought of my aunt, the woman who'd left me this place, her fierce spirit a guidepost for my own. She'd been a rebel, a woman who defied expectations. And I'd inherited more than her wealth, I'd inherited her fire. I stopped at the grand piano, my fingers tracing the keys, and made a decision. If the firm wanted to come for me, I'd be ready. I'd use every resource, every connection, every ounce of strength I had. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under the front door. No return address. Just my name in sharp black ink. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper. "Back off, or your son pays." The words were a punch, stealing my breath. I called Tom, my voice shaking, and he was there within hours, his face grim as he read the note. "This is standard," he said, but his eyes betrayed his worry. "They're scared. That's why they're doing this." I nodded, my resolve hardening. They thought they could intimidate me, but they didn't know who I was. I called Daniel, telling him about the threat. My voice calm despite the fear. "We're not backing down," I said. "But you need to be careful." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm not afraid, Mom. Not anymore." His words were a gift, a reminder of why I'd started this. We were in this together, and no threat could break that. I hung up, looking out at the ocean, the mansion's lights reflecting on the water. This was my fight now, not just for Daniel, but for the woman I'd become, a mother, a warrior, a force they couldn't silence. As the days passed, I felt the mansion's strength seep into me. I wasn't too old. Not for vacations. Not for battles. Not for love. I was just beginning. The threat hung over me like a storm cloud. His words etched into my mind. Couldn't sleep. The mansion's silence amplifying every creak, every whisper of the wind. I'd faced challenges before, long nights in the hospital. Years of raising Daniel alone, but this was different. This was a shadow I couldn't outrun. A danger that threatened not just me, but my son, his family, everything I'd fought for. Yet, standing in the grand hall, the chandeliers glowing like stars, I felt a fire ignite. They thought they could scare me into silence, but they'd underestimated me. I was no longer the woman who'd let her son's words cut her down. I was someone new, forged in the crucible of this fight. I called Sarah first thing in the morning, my voice steady despite the fear. "They're coming for me," I said, reading her the note. She was silent for a moment, then said, "This means you're getting close. They're desperate." She promised to double down, to trace the note, to find out who was behind it. Tom was next, his gruff voice a comfort as he outlined a plan: extra security for Daniel, surveillance on the island, and a deeper dive into the firm's connections. "You're not alone in this," he said, and I believed him. The mansion wasn't just a refuge, Anna Maria, it was a fortress, and I was its commander. Clara noticed the tension, her eyes sharp as she watched me pace. "You're not backing down, are you?" she asked, setting a tray of tea on the table. I shook my head, a small smile breaking through. "Not a chance." She nodded, her own resolve mirroring mine. Together, we went through the mansion, checking locks, securing windows, turning this place of beauty into a stronghold. Felt strange, almost wrong, to fortify a place meant for peace. But it was necessary. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was protecting the future, the family I was rebuilding. Daniel called that afternoon, his voice tight with worry. "Mom, I heard about the note. You need to leave the island. It's not safe." I closed my eyes, picturing his face, the fear I'd seen in the library. "I'm not running," I said. "This is our fight, Daniel. We see it through together." He argued, his voice rising, but I held firm. "Trust me," I said, echoing the words I'd used so many times when he was a boy. "I've got this." He was quiet, then said, "Okay, Mom, but I'm coming back. I'm not letting you do this alone." My heart swelled, the distance between us shrinking with every word. He arrived the next day, his face pale but determined. We sat in the study, the same room where he'd confessed his secrets. and I saw a new strength in him. He wasn't the broken man I'd seen weeks ago. He was fighting. Not just for himself, but for us. We went over the plan. Sarah's team was closing in on the note source. Tom was tracking the firm's moves. And Daniel would meet with prosecutors, offering more details to strengthen the case. It was a high-stakes game, but we were all in. I looked at him, my son, and felt a pride so fierce it hurt. "We're going to win this," I said, and he nodded, his eyes steady. The days that followed were a tense dance of waiting and action. Sarah uncovered a Leda low-level executive who'd sent the note. A desperate attempt to scare us off. Tom's team caught him. And under pressure, he spilled, implicating the firm's CEO in a web of threats and cover-ups. The evidence was mounting, and with each new piece, I felt the tide turning. But the fear didn't vanish. Every night, I checked my phone, expecting another threat, another shadow. The mansion's beauty was a stark contrast to the ugliness of this fight. But it gave me strength, a reminder of what I was capable of. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, Daniel and I stood on the balcony, the air cool and sharp. "I didn't know you had this in you," he said, his voice soft. "This place, this fight, I underestimated you." I smiled, the ache in my chest easing. "You're not the only one who's surprised," I said. I forgot who I was, too. We stood in silence, the waves crashing below, and I felt a connection I thought we'd lost. This wasn't just about revenge or justice, Anna Maria, it was about redemption. About becoming the family we were meant to be. As we waited for the final pieces to fall, I sent one last photo to Daniel's kids, a picture of the mansion at dusk. Its lights glowing like a promise. "Come back soon," I wrote. "Nana's waiting." The mansion wasn't just mine, Anna Maria, it was ours. A place where we could heal, where we could start again. The final blow came quietly, not with a bang but with a whisper of justice. Sarah's second article dropped. A follow-up that named the CEO and detailed the firm's collapse under the weight of its own lies. Daniel's testimony had been the key. His courage the spark that ignited the truth. The news spread like wildfire, and by morning, the firm was a husk. Its executives facing charges. Its reputation in ruins. I sat in the mansion's library, the newspaper in my lap, and felt a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. We'd won. But the cost was still unfolding. A ledger of losses and gains I couldn't yet balance. Daniel called from Seattle, his voice lighter than I'd heard in months. "It's over, Mom," he said. "They're done." I could hear the relief, but also the uncertainty what came next for him, for his family. I told him to come to the island, to bring Laura and the kids, to rest and rebuild. He agreed, and for the first time, I heard hope in his voice, promise of a new start. I hung up, tears streaming, and looked around the library. The mansion had been my weapon, my refuge, my redemption, and now it was something more, a home for the family I'd fought for. They arrived a week later, the ferry cutting through the morning mist. Emma and Liam ran to me, their laughter echoing through the grand hall, and I held them tight, my heart full. Laura's smile was warmer now, her eyes meeting mine with a new respect. Daniel was last, his embrace lingering, a silent thank you for everything we'd been through. We spent the day together, exploring the island, sharing stories, rebuilding what we'd lost. The mansion came alive with their presence. The halls filled with laughter instead of echoes. That evening, we gathered on the terrace, the stars bright above. Daniel raised a glass, his voice steady. "To Mom," he said, "for reminding me who I am." I smiled, my throat tight, and raised my glass in return. "To us," I said. "To family." We drank, the moment sealing something deeper than words. The pain of his words too old still lingered, but it was softer now, a scar rather than a wound. I'd come to this mansion to prove a point, but I'd found something greater, a purpose, a bond, a second chance. As the weeks passed, the mansion became our haven. Daniel started over, taking a teaching job at a local college. His passion for law rekindled in a new form. Laura opened up, sharing her own fears and dreams. And we grew closer, a team instead of strangers. Emma and Liam claimed the mansion as their own, their laughter a constant reminder of why I'd fought. I sent one final photo to Daniel, not of the mansion, but of Yuzel of Yusen, the balcony, the ocean stretching endless before us. "This is our vacation," I wrote, "and we're just getting started." The threats had stopped, the firm's shadow gone, but I knew the world wasn't done testing us. There would be new challenges, new battles, but I was ready. The mansion had taught me that its walls, its history, its strength. I wasn't too old. Not for vacations. Not for fights. Not for love. I was a mother, a warrior, a woman who'd reclaimed her place. And as I stood on the balcony, watching the sunset with my family beside me, I knew we'd face whatever came next together. The journey had started with a single photo, a defiant act against a son who'd forgotten me. But it ended with something Moria family reborn, a mother redeemed, a legacy of love that no one could take away. The mansion stood behind us, its lights glowing, a testament to everything we'd overcome. And as the waves crashed below, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. This was my victory, not just over Daniel's words, but over time, over doubt, over the idea that I was anything less than enough.